Sonny Liston was once the most feared boxer on the planet. He was a towering heavyweight champion whose fists struck terror into opponents and whose personal story captivated the public. In the early 1960s, Liston dominated the boxing world, famously knocking out Floyd Patterson twice in the first round to become world champion. He later lost his title in two legendary bouts against a brash young challenger, then known as Cassius Clay, fights marred by controversy and whispers of a fix. Outside the ring, Liston's life was a tumultuous journey from poverty and prison to fame, and ultimately to an early and mysterious death. In December 1970, Sonny Liston would die under strange and disturbing circumstances, which are hotly debated till this day. Sonny Liston's path to the heavyweight championship was as unlikely as it was rough. He was born into extreme poverty in rural Arkansas as one of over 20 children, and he endured a brutal upbringing. Notably, the year of his birth was never recorded, though it's believed that he was born in either 1930 or 1932. As a teenager in St. Louis, Liston fell into crime, which landed him in Missouri State Penitentiary by age 20. In prison, he discovered boxing under the guidance of a Catholic priest who ran the prison gym. Sounds like the plot of a movie to me, honestly, but that's the truth of the matter. Liston learned to channel his immense physical strength into the sport, becoming the prison champion and earning an early parole in 1952 to pursue a boxing career. Upon release, however, Liston found that professional boxing in the 1950s was deeply entwined with organized crime. He was effectively taken under the wing of mob-connected handlers who controlled lucrative boxing matches. Turning down their offer was not an option for a young fighter with Liston's past. Thus, from the start of his career, Liston was tied to underworld backers who helped propel him up the ranks. This connection would follow him his entire career and would perhaps be the reason that he would end up in an early grave. Liston made his pro debut in 1953 and rapidly built a reputation as a devastating puncher. By the late 1950s, he was dismantling one contender after another, using his ominously long reach and sledgehammer fists to knock out most opponents. His massive paw swings eventually earned him the nickname the Big Bear, a name I personally approve of. Between 1958 and 1963, Liston was virtually unbeatable. He defeated top heavyweights like Cleveland Williams, Zora Fowley, and Eddie Macon, often in brutal fashion. This string of victories made Liston the #1 challenger for the heavyweight crown, yet his shot at the title was delayed, in part because of his criminal reputation and mob ties. Boxing's authorities and even political leaders were uneasy about Liston fighting for one of the most coveted titles in sports. Famously, President John F. Kennedy privately urged reigning champion Floyd Patterson not to give Liston a title shot, given Liston's well-known underworld ties. Ultimately, Patterson, despite this presidential plea, agreed to face Liston. In September 1962, Sonny Liston finally got his title shot against Floyd Patterson in Chicago. Liston was a heavy favorite, and he confirmed those odds by demolishing Patterson with a first-round knockout to become the heavyweight champion of the world. It was the first time the heavyweight championship had ever changed hands in the opening round. A year later, Liston and Patterson had a rematch, and once again, Liston crushed Patterson in the first round. These back-to-back triumphs cemented Liston's status as the most dominant fighter alive. At 6 feet tall and roughly 215 pounds with an 84-inch reach, he was a formidable physical presence. Sports historians later compared his aura of invincibility to what Mike Tyson would cultivate a generation later. Liston's dominance in the ring stood in stark contrast to his standing in the eyes of the public. To many Americans in the early 1960s, Liston was the embodiment of a bad man. He was an ex-convict with suspected mob connections and a sullen, intimidating demeanor. In an era when the civil rights movement was demanding dignity and respect for Black Americans, Liston's image was divisive. He was often cast as the villain not only of boxing, but as a symbol in a larger morality play. Within the Black community, Liston drew criticism from leaders who felt he was a poor role model, especially compared with gentlemanly boxers like Zora Fawley. Inside the ropes, however, Liston soon met a challenger who would redefine boxing and culture, Cassius Clay. Their February 1964 heavyweight title bout in Miami was fraught with drama. Clay was young, fast-talking, and brash, a self-promoting 22-year-old who dubbed Liston a big ugly bear, turning his positive nickname into an insult. Few gave Clay a chance, with Liston being the 8-1 betting favorite. But in a stunning upset, Sonny Liston failed to come out for the 7th round, surrendering his title to the exuberant Clay. Liston cited a shoulder injury as the reason he quit on his stool, but the unexpected result ignited immediate speculation. How could the unbeatable champion be dethroned by a loudmouth young upstart? Naturally, many questioned whether the match was fixed. Some theorized that Liston held back against Clay and then gave up at the behest of his mob sponsors. The following year, a rematch took place in Lewiston, Maine, under even stranger circumstances. So yeah, here's the time for the big reveal, if you didn't already know. By now, Cassius Clay had taken the name Muhammad Ali. In the first round, Ali caught Liston with a quick right hand as Liston lunged forward. The punch that became known as the Phantom Punch, because so few saw it land clearly. Liston collapsed to the canvas and chaos ensued. Many at ringside didn't believe the punch was hard enough to knock him down, sparking accusations that Liston took a dive on purpose. The refereeing was confused, and the fight was over almost as soon as it began, with Ali declared the winner. To this day, Liston's loss in this rematch remains one of boxing's most debated moments, and one of the most debated moments in the history of sport. Importantly, this is the fight that gave us one of the most iconic photographs, not only in sporting history, but in world history. Ali is seen screaming at Sonny Liston, telling him to get up, with Muhammad Ali clearly believing that his opponent took a dive. The FBI and Justice Department investigated allegations of a fix, but they found no hard evidence to support those claims. Regardless, the two defeats shattered Liston's aura of invincibility. Once the meanest man in the world, he suddenly seemed vulnerable, and his reputation suffered. By the mid-1960s, Sonny Liston was no longer champion, and in the eyes of many, he was also a fallen idol of sorts, if he ever was an idol, hounded by suspicions. Yet he was still too proud and too skilled to fade away quietly. Liston spent the late 1960s trying to fight his way back into contention. He relocated to Las Vegas, won a string of matches against lesser-known heavyweights, and even served as a sparring partner to rising stars like a young George Foreman. However, his hopes of regaining the title were dashed in December 1969, when he was dumpstered by Lee Otis Martin, a bitter defeat that effectively ended his run as an elite fighter. Liston did step into the ring one last time in June 1970, defeating Chuck Wepner, the man who would inspire Sylvester Stallone to write the first Rocky film. He retired with an official professional record of 50 wins and 4 losses, including 39 knockouts. Even as his boxing career was winding down, Liston's personal life in Las Vegas had become a tightrope walk between two worlds. By day, he could play the celebrity, doing handshake appearances at casinos and posing for photographs with fans who liked his menacing persona. By night, however, Liston moved in Las Vegas's shadowy underside, where his notoriety afforded him protection and work of a shadier kind. He became an enforcer and debt collector for dealers and loan sharks, leveraging his fearsome reputation to intimidate those who owed money. There were reports that he cruised the Vegas streets in a pink Cadillac, making drops and pickups for criminal associates. By 1970, Liston was entangled in the very criminal underworld that had shadowed him since his youth. Federal narcotics agents had also taken an interest in Liston. In early 1969, he was present at a raid, yet mysteriously, he was the only one who was not arrested when federal agents swept in. This odd incident led some underworld figures to suspect Liston had cut a deal and become an informant. Liston vehemently denied being a snitch, but the seed of doubt was planted among his dangerous associates. According to some, this seed would rapidly grow into an olive tree, whose branches would be pecked apart by woodpeckers of mistrust. Not long after, Liston had a violent falling out with a mob boss and even slapped the man's teenage son during an argument over money in 1970. In short, by the end of 1970, Sonny Liston was navigating a very precarious existence, and a lot of people likely wanted him knocked off. He was financially strained, mixed up in mob debts and illicit dealings, likely under police scrutiny, and no longer insulated by the glory of the spotlight. Just after the new year rang in, Sonny Liston's troubled journey came to a sudden, grim end. On January 5, 1971, Liston's wife Geraldine returned home from an extended holiday trip and found Sonny lying lifeless in their Las Vegas house. His body was slumped against their bed, badly decomposed, indicating he had been dead for about a week. The timing suggests Liston likely died in late December 1970, with the official date later fixed as December 30th, 1970. Geraldine's horrifying discovery set off an investigation, but it was one riddled with peculiarities from the start. The police noted no immediate signs of foul play or struggle at the scene, and were quick to pronounce that Liston's death didn't look suspicious. Inside the home, however, they found some troubling evidence. A small amount of pot was discovered in Liston's clothing, and more ominously, about a quarter ounce of heroin was found in a balloon in the kitchen. On the dresser in his bedroom lay a loaded weapon, which was, perhaps, a testament to the dangers Liston felt lurking in his life. The coroner's examination later revealed apparent needle punctures on Liston's arm. Toxicology results were inconclusive due to the state of the body, but there were traces of morphine, a product of heroin metabolism, in his system, pointing to a possible heroin overdose. In the end, the Clark County coroner announced that Liston's likely cause of death was heart failure brought on by substance use. Vegas police ultimately closed the case, calling it an accidental OD with no signs of foul play. Sonny Liston was quickly laid to rest in a quiet gravesite, leaving friends and fans stunned and dissatisfied with the murky conclusion. Right from the outset, many who knew Liston refused to accept the official story. Sonny Liston was known to be extremely afraid of needles, and as such it seemed odd that such a man would choose to inject himself in this way. Over the years, the lack of clear answers has been filled by a trio of leading theories, each with its own tangle of facts and conjecture. The simplest explanation, and the official one, is that Sonny Liston died of a heroin overdose, whether accidental or intentional. Proponents of this theory point to the physical evidence at the scene. The substances found in his home and the needle marks on his arm tell the story, according to them. They suggest that Liston, who was known to be living a fast and reckless life at the time, may have experimented with injecting heroin and misjudged a dose, leading to a fatal overdose. It's true that by late 1970, Liston's lifestyle included plenty of risky behavior. He frequented after-hours clubs and was reportedly dealing in substances himself. It's conceivable that he sampled his own wares, or that, After years of physical pain from boxing, he turned to heroin for relief or escape. Another version of this theory is that the overdose might have been intentional. However, most who knew Liston found this to be unlikely since he was talking about the potential to get back in the ring one last time. Still, the overdose theory has significant holes. As mentioned, Liston's apparent aversion to needles casts doubt on the idea of him voluntarily shooting up. Notably, his friends who observed him in his final days indicated that while he was drinking heavily, he didn't show any of the telltale signs of heroin usage. Still, regardless, this remains the official story till this day. By far the most popular theory, and one that fits the backdrop of Liston's Vegas life, is that Sonny Liston was slain by mob associates or criminal enemies. One oft-cited clue is what happened 6 months before his death, after his final fight. In June 1970, Liston fought Chuck Wepner in New Jersey and won decisively. Before that bout, a couple of shady characters approached Liston and hinted that he might consider losing, since Wepner was a local favorite. Liston ignored the suggestion and beat Wepner to a pulp. It's been speculated that by refusing to throw the fight, Liston angered some underworld figures who had bet money on Wepner. If true, that could be a motive for retaliation, and essentially, Liston may have signed his own death warrant by not taking a dive. Another potential motive involves Liston's knowledge of criminal dealings. Having been so close to mobsters for years, Liston undoubtedly knew of fixed fights and illicit schemes. Some suspect that certain powerful figures worried Liston might talk to authorities given the 1969 bust, after which he was thought to have been flipped. Under this theory, which has never been proven, the mob hired a corrupt cop to give Liston a lethal hotshot of smack, ending him right there. Others point a finger at the dealers Liston worked with. Liston's violent altercation where he smacked a mobster's son over a monetary dispute could have created significant bad blood. Yet despite all these suspicions, hard evidence for foul play is scant. Police at the time found no signs of forced entry or struggle in Liston's home, and no one reported hearing a disturbance. The third theory intersects with the second, suggesting that law enforcement, either directly or indirectly, had a hand in Liston's death, or at least knew more than they revealed. This line of speculation often centers on the idea that Liston may have been an informant for federal narcotics agents. According to this theory, Liston was working with corrupt Vegas cops who facilitated his criminal behavior. Some suspect these federal agents were using Liston to build a wider case against rogue elements of the Las Vegas PD. This theory explains why the police department was so eager to shut the case down and accept that it was an overdose. More than half a century has passed since Sonny Liston's death, and we're still left with more questions than answers. In that time, Sonny's legend has only grown, and his reputation has managed to improve somewhat. He's now generally remembered as one of the hardest-hitting and most intimidating champions in heavyweight boxing history. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, remember to request cases you'd like to see covered in the comments. In June 1977, Tucson, Arizona was the scene of a baffling mystery when the body of escrow company owner Chuck Morgan was found in the desert under bizarre circumstances. Now, this isn't the story of Chuck Morgan, but rather that of Doug Johnston. But I have to give you a little background on Chuck in case you haven't seen my coverage of his case. Morgan had been shot once in the back of the head, yet he was wearing a bulletproof vest and his own weapon lay on the ground beside him. Stranger still, investigators discovered a $2 bill hidden in his clothing, scrawled with coded names and a reference to a Bible passage. Earlier that year, Morgan had vanished and then reappeared telling his wife he'd been abducted and dosed with a hallucinogen claiming he was secretly working for the government. Just months later, he disappeared again and turned up dead, leaving behind far more questions than answers. Despite these odd clues, some authorities initially floated the idea of a self-ending incident, a notion Morgan's family found unbelievable. Morgan's wife Ruth insisted he had been slain, noting he would never abandon his family without a word. Many believe that Chuck Morgan was silenced by powerful forces, as he had previously done escrow work for organized crime figures. But like I said, this isn't the fascinating story of Chuck Morgan, which I definitely need to revisit and give a full hour-long treatment at some point. This is the story of Doug Johnston, a man who inadvertently may have gotten caught up in the Chuck Morgan affair. 13 years later, in May 1990, another strange death occurred in Arizona, this time in Phoenix. 35-year-old Doug Johnston was found shot to death in his car outside his office parking lot. He had been struck by a single bullet behind his left ear. No weapon was found at the scene, and there was no sign of struggle, and only a single shell casing left behind. Though right-handed, Johnston had been shot on the left side of his head, and tests found no residue on his hands. From the start, the evidence pointed to Doug having been slain. A key connection between Johnston and Morgan soon emerged. Investigative journalist Don Devereaux. Devereaux lived and worked right across the street from where Johnston was eliminated, and at the time he was actively investigating Morgan's case. In fact, Johnston and Devereaux resembled each other, drove similar cars, and even had nearly identical addresses. This raised a chilling possibility. Perhaps a hitman mistook Johnston for Devereaux and took out the wrong man. Devereaux himself came out in support of this theory. He says an informant with intelligence community ties told him the bullet that cut down Doug was meant for Devereaux. According to the informant, there was a contract on his life due to his investigation into Chuck Morgan. In other words, the people who wanted to make it look like Chuck Morgan ended himself might have still been active in 1990, aiming to eliminate anyone asking too many questions. It's an alarming scenario, but it remains unproven. The connections are compelling but purely circumstantial, and notably Don Devereaux thankfully is still alive, 35 years later.